absolutely excited, chuffed to be with one of the greatest characters from within the industry. Mincy, how are you, mate? You good?
Yeah, I was so hoping you were going to say my name next.
You knew absolutely predictably I was going to go there, but look, in fact, we need to do our normal tug our forelocks. Mr. Josh Phegan, how are you, sir, with that ethereal glow around you today? Coming joining us from Australia. How's tricks?
Yeah, look, it's been pretty phenomenal. We've just done a big tour over in New Zealand, actually. That economy is actually just starting to recover after being the first ones to go in with higher interest rates and now the first ones to come out with lower interest rates. So I say that when I've been to New Zealand, I've been to see the future. Okay, so I kind of see what's happening a good 6 to 12 months ahead of what's going on inside of the Australian domestic market. Obviously, we're seeing quite a bit of stuff still go on in the UAE. That literally just continues to go from strength to strength over there. I think it's record everything every single time we talk to our clients there. And mate, we're looking forward to coming back and doing some work in London. It's been a little while since we've had the chance to be able to do something quite significant. So we're really looking forward to spending some time with Kerfuffle at the Kerfuffle Conference, which I've had to explain to a few Australians what that actually was. But they're very
Yeah.
excited to see that literally we're going to make it onto the pitch.
Well, first of all, I like being called quite significant. That strokes my ego massively, so that's wonderful. Also, the idea about having to explain what kerfuffle is, you could probably do it. Some people in the UK a bit of help there as well, but that we're fine with that. We can deal with that. Actually, I was just quite interested what you're having to say there as well. It's that UAE market is crazy, isn't it? I mean, we're lucky enough we know some of the same people over there, I mean, you work with some of the biggest names as you do all around the world, but it is fascinating. And just looking at this, Josh, we are in a world that, regardless of what Trump's trying to do with these tariffs, is getting just smaller and smaller and smaller, isn't it? And much more connected. I mean, we were lucky enough from my point of view, maybe not from yours, that we've known each other so many years and we've been coming around. And it was really quite difficult to make that connection happen in the past, wasn't it? But with the amount of businesses that are opening up in both countries, my old mob, Repeat, are obviously doing, massive things in Australia and everything else. You've got that, lots of fusion going on in that UAE market. Just on that point, Josh, from somebody who obviously does talk around the world, is that definitely your thinking that this, that things are just starting to join up a little bit more, or is it all still very, or do you think there is fragmentation?
I think that literally since mobile phones turned up and obviously the spread of information over social, we're now seeing market cycles that used to take 8 to 10 years actually happen in 6 to 8 weeks. And that has not changed. Like, I think that ultimately the best thing of what the UAE has got, which Australia would struggle with, New Zealand would do the same, and I dare say the UK would be exactly the same, is that they've actually got a really clear population target on where they actually want their country to be going out to the 2040 plan. And if you start to have a look at that, they're actually building it. And it's amazing when you get to talk to the guys at House and House, and they were telling me the other day that there was circa 12,000 off-plan sales per year, and they're now in a position that they're talking about 120,000 off-plan sales per year in Dubai in under 2 years. So when you've got a market that's literally times by 10, it's pretty amazing to watch. And they actually do talk a lot about the importance about people just wanting stability, wanting safety, wanting security, wanting to be in an environment where there's no media. And I think that that's a really interesting thing that the UAE has got that's quite unique compared to the rest of the world, is that the population is not terrified by the front page news that's on the London Times or the Sydney Morning Herald. And this is actually really interesting. Obviously, there's been some pretty significant global events happening right at the moment as we speak. And I was asking some of my clientele in the UAE if that was impacting on any of their listings and sales and buy demand. And I said, well, what are you talking about? Because they're not aware that those things have actually even gone on. And so, what that does go to show you is that ultimately sometimes ignorance is a bit of bliss. But I really think that ultimately, if we came out to Australia and we said, hey, we're going to have a population target on how big we want Australia in 2040, mate, they'd be out in the streets, marching with the placards, because they want to keep Australia small rather than make it big. And that actually has a huge issue when it actually comes to planning for infrastructure. This is the big difference. Australia as a country has kind of said, oh my God, accidentally we let in 500,000 people. Where will they live? And so now we've got this housing shortage and a housing crisis because we haven't actually done any of the infrastructure or the planning that's actually been required to actually provide that sort of infrastructure for it. So I think that literally, what you've got to realize is that, whenever I go into a marketplace and, coming over to the UK shortly, the first thing that I always do is I go and I talk to some of the key people that are on the ground and I ask them, hey, tell me a little bit about what's actually going on in the marketplace right now. So what's happening to interest rates? Because obviously that depends on people's serviceability. How much money does it cost to actually serve a loan? Also, in addition to that, what's actually happening to people's borrowing capacity? So can they borrow more or less, given what's actually happened to a change in interest rates over time? And then we got to look about what's actually happening in terms of supply. Are there lots of properties available or not that many available? And then what's actually happening in terms of demand? So how many people are actually inquiring on those properties, coming to viewings? How many of those properties are actually getting to sale agreed? And then how many are actually moving forward and through until completion? And then, basically what's the mood in the marketplace today? So is the mood, for example, that everyone's like, woo, go out there and buy the boats and the cars and the jet skis? Or are they a bit more like, woo, and let's film that for Instagram because we need to replay it multiple times?
I think we're a little bit woo.
More woo than way.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important conversation. Is that the lesson to it is that if that's actually the case, then people have got to buy because they've got to buy, and people have got to sell because they've got to sell. But discretionary sellers who are doing it purely to make a huge capital gain or a big profit are probably out of this particular marketplace today. So very much we're selling because we're downsizing or moving into a nursing home or a job relocation or having a baby or doing something else to go and buy as an investment property. And we have seen a lot of people saying, hey, we're a bit over some of the volatile share markets, and so we're going to go from stocks to blocks. And what that basically means is get out of the share market and actually move yourself into a position that now you go and buy good quality residential property because you actually want to be in a good quality asset class over the course of this next little bit to avoid all the volatility of global markets. So, David, I think there's some good points in there when you start to consider about, how you got to read a market for the types of conversations you're going to have, right?
Absolutely. Just want to pull you up on something you mentioned earlier. You talk about the UAE and Dubai, and obviously when we close our eyes and think about that market, it's a very sort of glamorous, high-end market, very much a luxury market. Is there a secondary market out there? Is there sort of just, the agents that you deal with, are they so focused on sort of selling off-plan luxury units, or is there a sense that there is churn there, that there's the same movements that you have in your Australian market and we have locally here?
There's the same movements that happen in every market. Now, whilst there's a huge amount of off-plan sales actually happening, you can imagine that the established residential product is moving ahead. And they got to call it the nervous money in the region. That, every single time a global event happens or something of significance, they often find that there's an extra 50 or 60 buyer inquiries later that day. And I think that's a really interesting conversation because at the end of the day, people do want to buy an established product. What will be in 2025 is the beginning of a lot of the properties that were sold on 5-year payment plans in 2020 will actually be coming due and completed. And so all of a sudden, that's really going to test the market to see whether or not there's a level of rental demand of which people have bought, those properties off market for. But literally, it is definitely an established market just as well as it is an off-plan market as well. I think the big conversation about it is that, like, when you ever think about it, and I read in this plan that they basically said that they see the UAE as being effectively the New York or the Las Vegas of the two biggest populations in the world of India and China. And so when you start to think about that ultimately I think they've got is it the MGM? I think the casino that they're building in a particular zone shortly. And mate, that's literally will replace Macau and definitely probably replace Vegas for anyone who's coming from that location, to them being within 6 hours of most parts of continental Europe via plane. It is an absolutely amazing part of the world. And, Australia, we're excited. We're about to launch the second airport here in Sydney. We're just not sure if we're going to get a bus or a train out there yet. We haven't worked out when we're going to do that, and we're not sure which airlines are actually going to land their planes there. So, just a complete lack of planning, and I think that's the best thing that you can get out of Dubai. This is what they do around that.
Josh, I mean, I can't wait for you to come here to the UK. So, I mean, obviously, since the last time you're here, you're going to be able to jump on our High Speed 2 train that has been now completed and working really, really capably. So, we do know a lot about infrastructure over here in the UK, and that's going to be very, very exciting.
Well, that's an interesting segue. Total lack of planning. Let's talk about the Kerfuffle Conference.
Yeah. Look, the only thing I was just going to say, David, before that is it is interesting though, isn't it? Is again, Josh does a lot of work over obviously in America as well. We've been lucky enough to go to NAR and things like that. The Americans who used to have that reputation for that can-do attitude, that ability to do it. I know the hold my pint metaphor doesn't work in those countries in the Middle East, but that vision to do that kind of stuff and to push it through is simply incredible, isn't it? Is to do it. How is in a slightly more relaxed world though over there in Australia, Josh? Are you seeing worldwide with your clients effects of, famously people say control the controllables, and then you get the most uncontrollable person in Trump out there, obviously just throwing, black swan events all over the place. But I think we're all here, aren't we? That whilst tariffs were obviously have gone insane in terms of the news, they don't seem to still be impacting quite as much, or at least for the moment, as we'd impacted. Are people just getting on with what they're doing in your markets, Josh, or how are you advising people to deal with
Yeah,
stuff
so
like?
Australia will probably benefit a lot from a lot of that because any of the exporters out of China that are in a position that they're looking to send their cars somewhere, they're going to send it to Australia. And so off the back of that, we're actually seeing cheaper cars coming in, and some of the impacts of the commodities and the steel and all the above. Well, mate, we'll just keep it ourselves or send it to China as well. So from that point of view, Australia is quite agnostic, although we are technically probably tied a bit more to the USA. We are obviously a big part of the Commonwealth in the UK, and it was surprising to me that I have to apply now for an ESTA to be able to come to the UK, and I have to pay for entry, even though I'm part of the Commonwealth. So I'll be taking that up with King Charles rather shortly. But I think the foundational idea here is that, like, what you've got to realise is that Australia as a market itself and New Zealand are all very different stages.
Yeah.
We've got to look about what's actually happening in Melbourne. Melbourne has a very prohibitive state-based government that's actually got some pretty significant land taxes that are in play. And so we've seen close to 22,000 investors actually sell investment properties in the course of the last 12 months in that particular marketplace. A lot of the holiday markets where people might go for a weekender, they're significantly in trouble, most likely across the whole of the country, particularly Palm Beach here in Sydney, for example, Bowral and Mittagong, some of the most beautiful, lush locations for a weekender. There are more houses there than you want to see. Someone told me recently that there was about 15 or 16 bank foreclosures on a few properties in those markets. And we have not seen that, I reckon in probably 20 years, that you'd ever see anything like that level of volume. And that's really going to show you that when you go to interest rate reductions, it's usually because you're at the peak weak point inside of the marketplace. And what a lot of people don't realise is that every single time an interest rate goes down, what it's actually really saying is that we've got a real lack of people with capability to be able to go and buy. And a lot of consumers have actually spent all their money. They've redrawn everything they can on the home loan. They've maxed out the credit card. They've actually spent all their savings. And so what actually happens initially when interest rates go down, it can take 6, 12, and even up to 18 months before you start to see any renewed signs of significant buyer activity or price increases. And New Zealand's a really good example of that, which is probably about 16 months from memory in terms of their interest rate reductions already beginning. And they're only just now starting to see a couple of extra buyers turning up to their viewings on properties. And so this is actually a really important part, that when interest rates were going up, everyone wanted to buy. They wanted to lock in the rate of the day. They were getting really significant capital gain. You're in a position that it was kind of the flavour of the month. David had done it, Simon had done it, so why hasn't Josh done it? So everyone had FOMO, and then we had the fungi, the fear of not getting in, and then we had fungo, the fear of not getting out in time. And what you actually just realise is that ultimately great real estate agents, what they do is that they go down and they get the conditions of the day. And it's probably my best example of that. If you go to a beach, one of the key things that you'll get is that you actually get the lifesaver, and the lifesaver's there, and they talk about when high tide is and low tide and the temperature of the water. And my favourite one are their sharks. Now, if there's sharks, I don't go swimming, but the basic foundational idea is that that's actually what we need to do inside of a state agency too. We need to be very clear about what are the market conditions of the day, and then how do we actually strategically go and play those conditions in terms of the types of conversations we're going to be having, the opportunities that we're actually going to go to seek out. How do we create competition in non-competitive markets? How do we move to a model where we can actually start to sell more of the properties that we've currently got on the market? So lots of really good quality price conversations, lots of really good quality work with our owners, but also too, making sure that we're becoming excellent at marketing. I think that marketing is really changing how the world is working, particularly here in Australia. We are now seeing a lot of metro markets and the actual marketing bill to be on our major portals, and also too to be able to do video and some photography and some styling on a property is hitting every bit of £10,000 per property. So like when you start to think about that on top of that, there might be an agency fee of £15,000 or £20,000, on an average sale price in Sydney. Like it's starting to get right up there. And so it's a really interesting time in our market. We've seen a very big increase in real estate agents selling marketing with buy now, pay later type services, with credit card facilities, and also to electronic funds transfer into a bank account as a bank transfer. So it's been a pretty amazing space to go to watch. I would say that most real estate agencies would feel in Australia right now that they're working about 30 or 40% harder to achieve the same level of sales and or revenue that they achieved last year. So, without a doubt, there's a lot more buyer work, a lot more seller work. Days on markets have increased a little bit, so you've definitely got to be doing that work with your sellers to bring down pricing.
And there's a sense then with all the world events and all the sort of things that you're talking about there, and harder markets, and I suppose ever since COVID as well, these sort of major life events that say they're going to disrupt everything, and sometimes the outcome is very different to what we imagined it was going to be. We saw that after COVID over here. I know you guys caught up with it as well. But there is also a sense from agents that, yes, they need to be the agent in the market of the day, and they need to sort of adapt to what the market is today. But they get tired, they get jaded, they run out of steam. All these world events sort of can overwhelm them. They literally don't know what to do next. I suppose that's where people like you come in, right?
Well, the whole conversation I think about is that, like, you got to learn how to get into your performance zone, what it is that you do to get into your recovery zone. We need more of that than we've probably ever had before, that there's a ton of energy management required to be phenomenal at this. And if you're not clear about the conditions of the day, then how do you go to determine the strategy? And I think that that's the big conversation in terms of momentum makers, that, when we come across to do that presentation at Kerfuffle Con, our big focus is about, like, giving people options on what are some of the things that you can do strategically. And we now build out some really specific tools, which I'm excited to show, because we've never actually shown these in the UK before. But these are what we've got to call our STM charts, and the strategies, the tactics, and the measurements of what the best estate agencies actually do. And we use these in lots of different areas, from giving people a menu of how to generate a ton of leads from a sales environment, how to generate a ton of leads from a leasing or a lettings environment, and then also to the conversation around what we actually do to strategically grow a business in terms of its average fee, its average sale price, and also to the volume of transactions that it actually gets to go and do. So it's kind of like a buffet. Whaley, and no doubt you'll be pretty excited about that. A buffet of ideas.
You're talking to the right audience here. Yet again, you've taken the first few minutes to think, what are these guys interested in? And you've honed in on our weak spot.
And the basic idea is that, like a buffet, it's an invitation and not a requirement to eat all. So from that point of view, you can actually choose the strategies that you like very specifically as a part of that. But I actually want people to walk away from that session feeling, particularly energetic and very driven about what you actually can do, and move into a position that you've got to remember that in business and in life, you get known for what you execute and nothing else. And so that's like, you don't get known for what you know, and you don't get known for what you're trying to implement. You get known for what you execute. And there's a great old school saying that you have to execute with excellence, or you'll be executed with excellence. But that basic idea is that to make sure that you just get out there and go and make things happen inside of your business. And, it's simple things that great business leaders do. Like, if I said to you, 3 o'clock every day, write out a list of 10 great people to call tomorrow morning when you come in, call those 10 people first. Now, whether or not that's buyers, sellers, owners, landlords, conversations around referrers, key builders, developers, software suppliers, your mates at Kerfuffle, like whatever that is, getting on the phone and doing those things is the big difference about what really makes it. And I think the days of a high street frontage where someone's going to walk in and just list their property with you are gone. That we operate inside of a digital world where we're now talking about, people not even potentially using a portal, but instead saying, hey, they're going to go to some sort of form of an AI and say, can you please show me the best 5-bedroom houses that are currently for sale inside of West Hempstead? And it will literally go and do the search for you and say, can you please book the appointment? And by the way, can you make an offer of 70% of their asking price and see which one gets accepted first? So we're now in a position that we're going to operate in a world where there's going to be radical transparency. And you need to think about it as an agent, that if you go into ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm going to sell my house in West Hempstead, which agency should I use? You'd be amazed to see what actually comes up, particularly when you go to press run deep research. And all of a sudden it goes to show you all of the different websites that it'll go to. But what is ranked very highly in Australia has been LinkedIn, believe it or not, and Instagram. And literally a lot of agents are not necessarily using that to actually show their wares around what it is that they do inside of the estate agency process. And so this is where the world's going to rapidly change. That's one way of how consumers are going to shop. The other great way, Simon, like I've been saying for many years in working with you, it amazes me the number of estate agencies globally that do absolutely nothing with their past clients. And I find that absolutely staggering that we still have to go and have that conversation. But when you think about it, we're in the month of June as we record today. But I get people to say, okay, great. This month, how many people have actually bought a property from you in the history of your estate agency in the month of June? And is it that hard to hold Back to the Future Day, where we literally jump on the phone and we get on the phone and we ring every single one of those people and say, hey, David, it's Josh. Congratulations. You've owned your home for another year. You're actually due for an annual checkup. How are things with you guys? How's the house? Would you like us to pop out and give you an idea on what your house is worth today? That might allow you to spend some equity, maybe go and buy another investment property, or maybe do something with your existing property. We'd be thrilled to come and have that chat. And then you see that, and then there's like landlords and their principal place of residence, and they've never been called either. I've been a landlord for 22 years. No one's ever picked up the phone to ring me to say, hey, Josh, would you like to add another one to your portfolio? Mate, we note that you live locally. We've never been out to your principal place of residence. Would you like us to give you an idea on what it's worth so then you can go to make some better decisions for the future? Now, if your estate agency has been around for a decade, for a day, for whatever the time frame is, you've probably got a past client, but how come you're not doing anything with it? And this is the amazing conversation, is that literally, why go cold when you can go old? And I think that's a really important foundational idea, that you want to be going back to all of those relationships that you've got with people that really matter. I'm not sure where your mind went there, Simon, when I said that, but it is a really important foundational conversation.
Again, and just to point
it's
out
scary all the places his mind goes to.
Just to be really clear, it is going to be a slightly more relaxed conference, but not quite that bad. But I think it is fascinating, and I think we've known each other so long now that I felt like I could finally approach you at one of the other ones when you'd come over here, and I was like, Josh, I can't believe you're still over here telling us, this foundational thing. Why don't you phone your past clients? And you did summarize it again perfectly. You just made that point about, I'll stop doing it when you guys start doing it. And what's really, really hilarious is that every agent that me and David and everyone at Kerfuffle and those conversations going on are talking about, we've got what we're doing on AI. We've got to be doing AI. And it's a waste of time if you haven't got your data, as you would say, in your database in the right format. So, you can throw as much AI at that as you want to, and if you haven't got it in a fit state, you're going to miss out on a lot of the upside of the AI that is literally able to do some of this really intelligent stuff, help you be more scalable, help you be more productive. Because I think what we are seeing, we're still seeing transactions well over 1 million here, so that there's no issue on that side of things. Yes, there's massive pressure as ever on fees and everything else there, but the stuff you're talking about is so important. Because I think, if I was to summarize, Josh, do you think there is a mindset issue in the UK in particular? Because one of the things we are launching at our conference is we're doing the Trusted Agents Awards. And one of the foundational parts of that is, look, there's loads of brilliant award, review sites out there. But to be honest, if you aren't doing it on the likes of Google, Trustpilot, Facebook, these are the ones that the public understand. And you just said yourself there, some of these businesses that have been going literally for decades might only have like 50, 100 reviews on Google. I mean, that's insanity when you think about the amount of people you are transacting with. Do we have a problem just on that level with actually talking to people and in terms of past clients and just asking whether we've even done the job for them?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. Like, the big conversations that everyone wants to chase the shiny new ball, rather than actually being really focused on how your business actually really goes to generate its leads. And this is the foundational conversation of what we do in growing really fast-paced estate agency businesses, is we actually set down a framework of like 7 very specific things to go and grow new talent. Now, that whole conversation is that, first of all, we've got to get phenomenal area knowledge. We've got to be pretty amazing around what we've got to call our market knowledge. Now, how do we then help people to improve their level of transactional knowledge? What are the things that we can do to be phenomenal around brand knowledge? And then we then think about 3 very specific skill layers. How do we actually go to generate our leads? What do we do to actually win the instruction from the client? And then how do we sell, service, or manage? And so what we actually do is we break it into those 7 frameworks, and we've got a series of questions around each. And some of that we actually use the ChatGPT type stuff to assist us, particularly in building things like area knowledge, or to help us surmise the document about what's happening in terms of market knowledge. But we're actually then getting agents to then think, well, like, what, the reason why your business is where it's at today is based on the strategy that you've executed. And what I'm amazed about is that, businesses don't have a documented strategy. If they do have a documented strategy, they don't have to do it. And then the next conversation after that, there's no clear measurement to know whether or not it's actually being successful. And so that whole idea where you're saying oh, you need to go get more reviews, nice strategy. What's the tactical component of that? Is that done at the point of the transaction? Is it done at the point of completion? Is it both the buyer and the seller? Is it both the tenant and the landlord? What are the conversations that you're looking at there? Is that delivered via SMS, via email? What does it look like when you got to ask for a review? How do you actually respond to those individual clients? And what's the measurement? So how many transactions do we do this month, and how many of them do we actually get a 5-star review? And that's where you start to think about it, is that the problem in business today, without a doubt, is that people are tactically excellent, but they are fundamentally strategically negligent. And so what we want to do, and particularly, is we want to actually get the strategy right to make sure that you can actually grow a phenomenal estate agency business. And this is not like, a conversation to be had lightly, because at the end of the day, in every marketplace, there's a number one real estate agency, and there's probably another 10, 20, 30, 40 that are there on the street corner that actually have no idea how they're going to take that number one position. And I love that. Nick Dowling, the chairman of Jealous Craig here in Australia, a very significant agency down in Melbourne, has always said to me, he said, Josh, the number one thing that a business needs is like a guiding light. And that guiding light may well be, okay, what would it take for us to become the number one in every single one of our chosen markets? And when we say the number one in lettings, the number one in sales, the number one based on market share, the number one based on reviews, however you want to get that number one clarified, there's something about being the number one. You've got more boards up, you've got more sold stickers, you've got more conversations, you've got more lease stickers. You can be out there inside of your marketplace. You're meeting more buyers, more tenants, more landlords, more sellers. And this is like the foundational idea, is that you've got to gear up and go to deliver that level of customer experience. Now, at the end of the day, that's probably a really important foundational idea, because I heard that you're saying that, fees are under pressure. The fees are always under pressure. And what the foundational idea is to think about this. Like, if you're not going to be the cheapest, then how are you planning on winning? And that's that whole conversation. I think that, I'm not going to be the cheapest. I certainly am not planning on doing that. I want to be seen as the very best value, but that must be based on the delivery of the experience and the skill. And there are people that will go out there and they buy a really cheap car, and there are people that go buy a really expensive one. And the belief is that both of them feel like they got value. And so this is about learning that people buy beyond the product or the service. And so starting to think very differently about that. No one at Harley Davidson thinks that they're silly enough to sell motorbikes. What they actually sell is the freedom machine. Chanel does not sell handbags. They actually sell foundationally, that moment of arrival. And so what you've got to do is that literally, this is a really important foundational piece to get right. That if you think that you just lease houses and you just sell houses, you've already got it wrong. Because you are facilitating, what is probably some of the most difficult circumstances for people, and sometimes some of the most exciting situations in people's lives, and you're helping them throughout that quality of that process. And that also includes your staff as an internal customer, about giving people proper career progression, proper training on the way. I think I read a stat that one of the fastest roles that turn over inside of any business is a negotiator, but yet the negotiator is the one that meets the buyer who buys. And the valuer never ever gets to meet the buyer who buys, who becomes the seller. So there's some foundational issues about the structuring of how we've got it running in the UK, and also to how we've got it running here in Australia and New Zealand, and also to in Dubai, that if we get those things right and we're prepared to challenge the model in the right way, you can actually go to build not only an incredible customer experience, but you can get customers who actually want to pay more to use you. And I think that that's a really important conversation, is that literally what sort of things could we do before, during and post the transaction that makes it really easy for people. Now, we saw technology, for example, recently where someone walks into a property, they can basically get like a Matterport camera, they go 1, 2, 3, they get a full floor plan of the property, and then they have 180 additional service providers that within under an hour can provide you with a full quote to actually have the walls painted, have the carpet replaced, have all the rubbish removed outside. And this can actually be now done so that now the agency can be providing the quotation for all of those services. And then once they then do that, that's provided to the seller. So the seller is allowed to be able to choose which renovations and things they want to go to put in play. And then once the buyer buys, you can also give the link to the buyer, so the buyer can go and get all of their trades and services lined up for the moment they take completion to get the walls painted and the carpet replaced and all of those things. And when you start to think about this, this is like, it's revolutionary about where the world's going to go. Then you've got to make the decision to adopt technology that improves the life of the customer, that makes their situation better. And that's where I think a lot of people have been, busy putting in technology just for technology's sake. But you know what? We've probably got 5 different ways that we could have done, tonight's webinar. But, we chose a particular medium to go and do that. Why did we choose that medium? Because it's trusted, because it works, and because it's easy. So from that point of view, that's what we've got to go and do too. And I think that there's, too many people that are spending a lot of time on distractions rather than actually chasing their vision. And I read a quote to that effect last week, which was, when all you've got is loyalty to your distractions, then there's no way that you're ever going to be able to go and achieve your vision. And so this is the problem, time to get out of the distraction lane and into the lane of actually building a phenomenal estate agency business by getting really clear about what you do strategically in each of those 7 areas. And I don't know if we've given too much away, but I bet you can tell I'm pretty excited to be coming across and to be doing Momentum Makers with you this year.
You absolutely are, and obviously, and look, the only thing, obviously, this is going to be our first big conference there. So clearly, as you know, and this isn't just about the size of the buffet. We don't do things by halves. So we're obviously really pleased that you've spoken everywhere, but we are dead chuffed to be doing Wembley Stadium. So it feels kind of fitting that you're talking about some of this foundational stuff about being champions and everything at a place that's kind of renowned for that. David, obviously you're far more, as famously I come from the tech side of the business, and you're in touch with the agents there. How much of what Josh is talking about there, I mean, it absolutely resonates the conversations that we're having. But what do you feel is stopping the UK agents, because they've had access to kind of so much here? How important is it for them to get in the room and hear this kind of information directly?
I think sometimes they can't see the woods for the trees. So I think that they're guilty of putting their head down and not seeing the value in strategic planning, not seeing the value in having an actual goal and an outcome. So if you walk into any average agency and say, where do you guys see yourself in 6 months' time? They will tell you that they have no idea. They're just trying as hard as they can to boost the number of listings that they've got, but there's no real strategic push. And those that do have a real disconnect between the plan that they've got on the wall and the delivery. And I think Josh is nodding away over there, but that's everything that Josh is talking about delivering here at this conference. But I think that's really the truth of it. We don't plan enough. We don't train enough. We don't keep checking in, and we don't keep measuring. What are the results of that campaign? Is that working? Do we need to change it? Do we need to tweak it? Do we need to move to something else? What is resonating with the audience? Do we have a fundamental sort of mindset problem with a certain section of the business? So sometimes we silo our businesses. As Josh said, there's a massive disconnect. Some people don't even meet the buyers. Some people don't even talk to the sellers. And are our valuers, for instance, getting jaded and worn down and not having that kind of time to sort of reconnect with what they should be doing, just the basics? And then further on down the line, are we just turning it into a bit of a sausage factory, which has taken all the kind of emotion and empathy out of everything that we do, but we're dealing with the details of people's lives? These are stories that that we should be able to tell to future customers, because that's what people buy.
100%. And when we were sitting here, Josh, weren't we? I mean, it was obviously we knew we had to have you kind of hosting our first conference because of that ability to I think one of the issues is what I've been lucky enough to come away with you and do things like that, the blue sky stuff, and people hear stuff like blue sky and they hear strategic and they sometimes think it's a bit ethereal, a bit sort of out there. But what you've always been about doing is putting that into being able to implement and be tactical about everything as well, isn't it? And so from our point of view, we've got that breakfast session where we're going to set out the overall strategy. Then we're going to go into more detail, and then we're going to have the session for those people that are bringing their staff along to say, look, this is actually how you connect all of this through together and put it into an overall strategy. I think that's so important.
Well, I think that the big conversation, we went to a couple of key clients and I asked them a very simple question. I said, why do you use me as a trainer? And, the common feedback that we get a lot is that, people say, hey, Josh, we really love your energy. We love the way that you think. And we also love that you're a systems guy. So a form, a checklist, a visual, and a dialogue. And so every single time before I walk out into an organization, before I go into a conference like this, I always think, okay, great. Well, do I have great energy today? Am I thinking today? And am I in a position I'm going to show a form, a checklist, or a visual dialogue that people can put back into their business? So practical and tactical is the really important takeaways. We're not spending a whole heap of time over here in some sort of mystical land. We're getting very, very clear that you can do this afternoon. You can say this to your past clients. You can say this to your current landlords. You can say this to an existing seller. You can say this to a buyer. So then you can actually walk away with a ton of confidence and actually make a ton of pounds, about in the way that you got to do it. And you got to realize, I think in the great words of the old Tom Peters, Tom came out and said, a business should not just not make a profit, it should make an obscene profit. Because if it makes an obscene profit, then it's actually got margin. If it's got margin, you can actually train the best people. And if it can train the best people, it can actually deliver the best service. And if it can deliver the best service, it can attract the best customers. And if the best customers really love it, then they're going to be prepared to pay for it. And if they're prepared to pay for it, there's going to be a lot of profit. And if there's a lot of profit, then all of a sudden you can reinvest to reinvent. And I think that that's actually the most foundational idea is that, and I think that, Simon, you and I had a nice little coffee one day in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And it was an interesting conversation because when we were there, the conversation that we actually had is that, maybe the UK lost 10 years to arguing over whether or not, your agency should be high street or whether or not it should be online.
Yeah.
And now what we've actually just worked out is that like literally no one ever won that debate and nothing ever changed. But what we actually do know is that great customer service transcends all market conditions. And this is the interesting thing, is that when you go to Warren Buffett, I start thinking about this, like customer experience is equal to brand and brand is equal to pricing power. And Buffett will go to buy a particular brand because he believes that they've got pricing power in that particular vertical. Now, I don't know about you, but if you go to a restaurant and being a non-drinker, I say to someone, could I please have a Coca-Cola? And they turn to you and they say, oh, look, we've got Pepsi. Is that all right? And then you're like, well, no, not really. But like if they said to you, look, for £1 more, we'll give you Coca-Cola, mate, I'd pay the extra pound. And that's the difference in terms of like literally I won't look at lookalike products because I actually fundamentally know that particular taste or the brand experience or the memories that I've had might be the reason out. Now that's a simple soft drink, but when you think about it, in Australia we've just restarted the Coca-Cola, with your name on it, and so like all of a sudden you see people back at the supermarket looking to try to find whale on it so they can buy one for their mate Simon Whale for when they see them shortly. But the basic foundational idea is that, what that is, it's all about personalization. And, consumers actually want a highly personalized customer experience. Now, you can deliver that, with like 90% of all the basics need to be done, dot I's, cross T's for compliance. But it's the extra little 1%ers that you put in play that are scalable that make all the difference. And that could be even the basic of just getting your mail redirected when you actually sell your house so that all the physical mail goes to the right address. And by the way, now I've got your forwarding address. I can now put that inside of the CRM because you're now a future seller in that particular location. So that's what the skill is about learning why you do what you do and then how it fundamentally allows you to provide better quality customer experiences. And that's really, what I think a lot of agencies could spend some time on to be able to get better fees and to win more instructions and to win uncontested. And at the end of the day, there's going to be 10% of all transactions every year where that particular seller or that particular landlord is going to look for someone cheap and they are not your customer. What you've got to do is you've got to go to be able to establish value in such a way that people go, I love what you do. I definitely want you. I'm standing here in the waiting line. I'm lining up at 6 a.m. for the opportunity for when your office opens at 9 o'clock to use you as my estate agent. Now, that might be seen as a bit extreme, but that is the foundational idea that literally, why do people line up to go and see Coldplay as an example? Because they really want to go and see the band. And I think it's going to be no different when they come to Wembley, is that ultimately they want to be around the most successful estate agents in the country, people that are very forward thinking, seeing some of the best suppliers in industry to find better ways to go to serve their customers, but also to make it easier for the internal customer, better known as their staff, to deliver those wow type moments and experiences. And I think there's an old school story, was it the Ritz-Carlton, that said that every single one of their busboys had up to £1,000 to spend every day. So when they were out there on the front driveway, if something didn't go right, they could actually fix it immediately for the customer at that particular point in time. And I get you to think a little bit about that. Like it's a completely different way, whereas we're like, oh, it's broken, is it? Geez, I hope they fix that before it gets to completion day. And, we need to start thinking more differently about how we're going to provide better quality services. And, in the absence of differentiation, the customer is always going to shop on price. So you've got to be able to, clearly articulate the reasons why your estate agency should be the nominated estate agency that they should select and why they can go to pay more with pleasure because of the foundational idea around what it is that you got to do before, during and after. So I'm super excited. I've never done Wembley, so this is going to be a great opportunity to be able to get out onto the big pitch and see how it all works. I did Google the Wembley Stadium setups, and I think I saw Robbie Williams set up. So there's no expectations on sound and lighting, Simon, but it sounds like you're going to put on one hell of a show.
I think that's one thing you never have to worry about with me. As David has been shouting at me, you're absolutely crazy, you're mental for doing this. But I think that we do have a build it and they will come methodology. And I think ultimately, Josh, one of the things I get frustrated about, and again, probably making myself more unpopular than I already can be, is that, and it'll be interesting to get your view on this, whether I'm being unkind on my own country folk here. Is I do think there is an issue with. I think I genuinely believe that Pareto 20% thing is absolutely true. I think it's demonstrable by so many of the clients you work with over here as well, that they are getting just so much better and leaving them behind. I think though that listening to so many of the UK agents that talk the talk about our staff come first, training and development comes first, and it doesn't seem to actually work its way through. We're putting on this event here. We're encouraging people to bring their team members along so that they can do this. And then people are sort of saying, well, we've got a couple of events this year. It's like as if you only go to the cinema, twice a year or something like that or you only, read a book or something like that.
I think that there's a
Why
better
would you limit
analogy than
it?
that, Simon. Like it's like that
Well,
person who said that I went to the gym, I only had to go once.
yeah, well, yeah, again, you've got your audience absolutely nailed on there. It is. Do you think? I mean, again, and I'm not asking you to psychoanalyze the Brits because that would be that would be quite painful for anyone here having to do it. Why do people get? Why does like the likes of Eric, Josh, get 4 to 5 thousand people, and the UK, as big as we were at Property Mark the other day, it's absolutely huge event. I think there was just shy of 2,000 people here and everything else. And yet we're a much bigger industry, a much bigger market than over there. I've always had this, having been lucky enough to meet actually loads of your clients where, whether it was the O'Brien team or something like that, and lots of the staff members were actually paying to go to ARIC themselves because they have a fierce determination for self-improvement. Do you think that is true? Do you think that's changing in the UK or why don't we seem to do
Oh,
the
there's
same?
no doubt. There's no doubt that I think it's changing globally. Like, you're now in a situation that you can listen to a podcast, you can read a book, you can
Yeah.
watch a video on YouTube. Like, there's lots of different ways that you can actually train and grow. But what we've actually seen in the attention society that, people can't stay in a particular location. And I walked into a training event recently where, no one took an entire note for the full 30 minutes. And I got to the end of it. I said, geez, you guys must be awesome. And everyone thinks that the AI note taker is going to do all of the heavy lifting for them. But yet it doesn't actually sink in deep into the brain. You're not actually in a position that you're really going to be able to go to use that information. And that's where, I think that, for example, I was convinced that AI would rule the world and that I wouldn't have a job by March. I'd done so much reading on it in December and January. So I thought my business model was over. And a few weeks later, I got the opportunity to be able to coach a 19-year-old girl and one of my clients. And she's been through some pretty significant life events. And I said to her, look, if I could give you a book that I think would change the course of your life, would you read it? And she looked at me and she goes, nah. She goes, I don't read. And that's at that point where I then just realized that I'm going to have a job for a long period of time because just because you can prompt AI to do it, you still actually have to go and do the work. And every single time that a market gets tough, I can tell you, man, people turn away from technology in isolation and they move 100% towards relationship orientation. And like I've got this whole conversation. I look at was it Apple that released that iOS 26 a few days ago, and they said in that they've now got permanent call screening coming from September. So the basic idea is that on your mobile device, if you see a number that you don't know, an AI agent answers the phone and says, "Why are you calling, Josh?" "Oh, I'm Simon Whale. I'm calling from Kerfuffle. I want to talk about the event that we're doing at Wembley." It will then come up with a little message for me to either accept or deny, and then ultimately then I can accept that and I can take the call live. Now, a lot of people are really worried about that technology. I'm like, we've been doing it here in Australia for a decade. Like, I don't know about you, we've been screening calls for a long period of time. And so if you're not in the mobile phone, and they've actually got your contact details, then you're in a position you're not even going to make it in this market. And this is where a lot of people go, hey, how does influence work? Face to face at the top, Zoom then.
Yeah.
Next thing after that is then the phone call. Then you then go to a voice note, Habibi, huge in Dubai. And then after that, we then go to an SMS and then we go to an email. Why is it that I say, hey, Simon, can you call David and ask him about whether or not he's able to come to the Kerfuffle conference? Do you then go 2 days later, oh, how'd you go with David? Oh, I emailed him. No, I didn't ask you to email him. I didn't know this was a choose your own adventure. I wanted you to call David because I want to know where he's at and what's going on in his life and what's happening in his business and why would he need to be there and what are some of the conversations around what's actually happening more contextually. And I think that that's really where the skill set is to learn where the power of influence is inside of your business so that ultimately you can be incredibly influential and be able to make more income more often. And you know what, like estate agency is the best industry in the world. The UK have been massive pioneers. You've had a really substantial conversation around what you've done with some of the most beautiful and iconic brands. And now there's a conversation to actually significantly lift productivity because there's no trade winds coming from behind your back of COVID or free money anymore. And now you actually have to be really good at what you do to get a seller to sell and a buyer to buy and ultimately a tenant to lease out a property and an owner to be in a position to give you the opportunity to be able to manage their property or to ultimately at least be able to do the leasing side of it. So, this is interesting. I think that if you look at any business to be recession-proof, it needs to know how to ride the waves, both the highs and the lows. The best businesses that I work with tend to do better in recessions because they actually stay really focused on their strategy. They're super tight about the quality of their people, and they're making sure that people are investing in themselves. And I can tell you that somebody who pays a couple of £100 to go to an event versus someone who doesn't, the person who does pay, they're going to be in a position they'll take 10 times the level of notes of the person who gets the old free ticket sponsored by the boss. So it's really important to actually, get people to be co-contributing as a part of that conversation to make sure that you're building that culture of learning and growth and development, to make that stuff happen.
And it reinforces itself, doesn't it, Josh? When you get into that, it becomes that flywheel, doesn't it, where you just keep going and keep going. And I think one of the things that we have loved is actually seeing, so many of the Australians who have come over here and speak with passion as you always do, and everything else. That's created a real, a real thing over here as well to keep doubling down on that. And as you said, it's so wonderful now, and we're going to be unashamedly, look, we're all about being people, if that makes sense, and about having the right tech to, because the best tech should, there's always that point about dehumanizes, but the tech these days goes entirely the other way, doesn't it? It allows you to give you more opportunities to connect and actually and to build on those relationships. And here's the thing, is we keep always used to say, I've never seen an agent that with the right tech can't improve what they're doing. And, and we talk about that they will have a strategic advantage over the guy next door, when they open the doors in the morning. But with AI now, it's even before, it's 24, before they open the doors, it's 24/7, 365 days a year, isn't it? And
I think that's a big conversation that the world's changed. And what you've got to do is you just got to go and adapt. And I think that's the big conversation, is that literally energy, passion, tenacity, strategy, the world does shift. I'm worried for the kids of the future. I saw recently McDonald's and also too Burger King. They're in a position now that they have an AI agent take your order through drive-through. So the age-old story of a 14 or 15-year-old, our kids having a chance to have their first job is pretty much gone. So, from that point of view, you want to get out there and you want to get strategically fit.
It's interesting what you say about that age group, particularly that 14, 15-year-old. What I do find is that our generation, and I'm being generous to all the people on this call now by putting us all together in the same generation, but our generation is quite in awe of what AI is able to do in terms of heavy lifting. And some of us will see it as a threat. Some of us can see it as opportunities. The next generation, so talking to my kids who are, budding teenagers, so I've got anywhere between 12 and 17, they're highly, highly attuned to what is AI and what isn't AI. And they steer away from anything that is AI. They seem to just have this innate, almost like the ability to spot fake interactions. So they will dismiss AI content instantly, whereas people like me go, "Oh, that's quite smart, isn't it?" But I can tell that it's AI, but I'm willing to be duped by it. There is a generation of kids out there that are not going to stand for it necessarily, and that they crave more of that kind of personal interaction, I suppose, or genuine interactions.
So I might be quite bold when I say this, but I think that with all of these tools and all technology, the hype is always big in the beginning, and it takes a long time for it to catch up. AI will be no different to what SMS has been. It's going to be another tool that you'll use appropriately, and you'll work out some ways to actually make it more effective inside of your business. But hey, we're not at an AI conference. We're talking a lot about strategy, about how to run a great estate agency business, and that is going to be Kerfuffle Con. When's it on, Simon, and where is it?
come on, Josh, you should have the detail there. July 10th. July 10th.
Please tell me you've got it booked in.
Yeah. It's the only publicly ticketed event that I'm doing in the UK for all of 2025.
Look at that scarcity right there. There's a man who understands how this stuff works. Josh, honestly, we couldn't be more excited about it. I think we've got such a great group of of agents coming along. We've got speakers, fantastic speakers there as well, and those supplier partners as well that can make it happen. So look, it goes without saying that's kind of like what everybody kind of talks about there. But I think we've got a very different edge in terms of and I think the venue kind of backs that up as well. So
well, in the UK, we're calling it the Big Three, aren't we? Because the weekend before is the British Grand Prix. Then also in addition to that, you've got Wimbledon, and now you've got Kerfuffle Conference all in 8 days. So it's going to be a very big time in the UK.
it was only a matter of time before we were included in the greats, in the pantheon of greats. So that's, yeah, absolutely there. Josh, we're looking forwards to it. Can't wait for you to come over. Your energy and it has always been boundless and everything else. So look, for today, thanks very much. And we encourage anybody obviously to look into the details, go to kerfuffle.com and talk to us about more details about it, because tickets going quick.
Look forward to seeing you guys there. Cheers.
Josh, thanks
Cheers,
very
Joe.
much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye bye.